Okay, so today we're going to move from the world of Photoshop into the world of InDesign. So we made it through kind of the first little module of the class. That does not give you the right to forget Photoshop. So this class is fundamentally built on building skills and then adding those skills on top of other skills. So I'm going to assume going forward that when we're working in InDesign and you're making a poster, today you're going to make an album cover, and you took an image and you're going to use that image, I'm assuming that you're going to take it into Photoshop and do post-processing on it to make it a good image before you drop it in to InDesign. So I'm assuming that the skills you learned in Photoshop will continue to be used, even though they're not specifically emphasized. You know, today I will talk all about InDesign and placing images and bringing image files in, etc. And I won't go back into Photoshop and remind you to post-process. I'm just kind of assuming that you will do that. So we will come back and revisit Photoshop at the end of the semester, so it's not over. The Photoshop segment isn't over, but it's a good breaking point to move into InDesign. We'll stay in InDesign for a couple weeks, and then we'll move into Illustrator, and so we'll kind of bounce through, and then we'll come back. What you'll find is as the semester goes on, there'll be more and more we're working towards something, and then suddenly we weave back into Photoshop, or suddenly we do some AutoCAD, and then we weave back into Illustrator. And so they're all meant to kind of go together, and that's the point of learning all these to begin with. But as part of starting out with the InDesign software program, we're also shifting a little bit from the things that we've been talking about in lecture to more of a graphic design base. And so previously we talked a lot about photography. Now we're going to shift into this graphic design realm, and we're going to talk a lot about layouts, organizing information. We'll talk about typography. We'll talk about fonts, what fonts to choose for specific things. For those of you that are in 121, your first posters probably got rejected because they used the wrong font. If they haven't, they probably will be. Those are the things that happen. I'm hopefully going to correct that for you so you have an understanding of why we use certain fonts and when we use them, etc. So today, before we get into the specifics of graphic design and layouts and fonts and that sort of thing, we're going to spend some time just talking about graphic design in general. More about the design process, more about your intuition, and how do you cultivate those skills and build them up. So first off, what is the function of graphic design? I'm up here talking about graphic design. Who knows anything about graphic design? Anything? Give it a stab. Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think that's a very good description of it. It's even more specific than I was looking for, but that's a good way of thinking about it. It's a way of conveying information to somebody. And I would argue, why is it important is my next question. I would argue that graphic design is important in almost everything that we see and interact with in life. And you can tell really quickly the things that were carefully thought out, carefully done, versus the things that were thrown together that you're interacting with. And it makes a big difference. It's small, it's subtle, but it's the communication of messages through the juxtaposition of words and pictures. And I think that's a really concise way of saying what is graphic design. So essentially, you as a graphic designer are responsible for words and pictures, and you're putting those two things together to somehow communicate a message to somebody about something. And it's through how carefully you do that that you can be more effective or less effective. It is the visual synthesis of thought. Design objectives. So if I put this up here blank and I asked you what are some design objectives, you could probably come up with these. Things like guidance or persuasion are good examples. Encouragement, just plain communication. How do you communicate some information? Those are all important. Motivation, education, dialogue, you get the idea. These are all things that graphic design can do for us, or that we want it to do for us at least. So I'm throwing up pictures of just layouts just to get these going in the back of your heads. Establishing function. So first off, we have to establish the function. What is the purpose of the design? So I'll use some examples when I try to talk about this. So let's say you guys are going to get your assignment next week for this InDesign portion of the class. It'll be assignment 103, and you're going to be doing a poster, a lecture series poster. And so if I use that as an example, what is the purpose of designing a lecture series poster? Ideas? Entice people to come to the lecture. Right, who's going to lecture? So it's telling us information about the lectures. So if we start to establish the function is to tell us who's coming, to tell us when they're coming, to tell us where they're coming, and even better, to cause us to want to go. That's definitely the function or the purpose of the design. And just understanding whether it's an invitation, a poster, it's a book, whatever, those are going to help guide you. What's your primary objective? Who's your audience? So in the case of a lecture series poster, who's your audience? Your audience is all the students. Maybe it's the faculty, but it's most likely the students. What's your desired reaction? Get them to go. It's the designer's responsibility to create strong communicative messages and experiences that support the function of design on behalf of the client and for the viewer. There's a couple key things in this sentence. So first off, we're creating these strong experiences that support the function of the design. But here, this is what I want to point out. On behalf of the client and for the viewer. So this is really important to understand. You tend to work for somebody, and that somebody isn't always the person you're trying to reach with your design work. Sometimes it's the same. You're designing a house for somebody. In that case, the client, the person that's paying you to design the house, assuming it's their house, they're going to live in it. So the person who's living in it, the viewer in this case, is the same as the client. But in other cases, especially in graphic design, often somebody's paying you to do the graphic design work, and they're not the ones actually using it. So in a lecture series poster, you're doing the design work for all the students that might come to the lecture. Designer skills. Again, another list here that we could sit down and come up with rather easily if we just thought through it. So analysis, perception, communication, research, management, problem solving, visualization. You get this idea. Inspiration. So I think this is something that's important, especially as you guys are young, just starting out in your design process, thinking about design school. Most important thing you can possibly do is be aware of your surroundings. You can learn so much by just having your eyes open and thinking about what you see and saying, does that look right? Does it not look right? Does it make a difference? Does it not make a difference? These kinds of things really matter. And if you're aware of them, it will help train you. Are you open-minded? Are you attentive? Are you observing things? Or are you just trying to get to class and have your coffee and go home? Which is really easy. At the end of the semester, you're going to be so exhausted because you're in studio class, you won't have slept in days. It's pretty hard to be aware of your surroundings. I get that. But at the same time, it's really important that you are. It's important that you're aware of it because it's going to help you become a better designer. So your inspiration is found and transformed into tangible objects. You take this inspiration and you make things out of it. That's part of what fuels the design process. It is also different for everyone, even if we share the same experience. So let's say that we go to a lecture together. We go and sit and we watch this. Let's say we see Tom Main, or we see, I don't know, some big name architect. We sit down and we watch his lecture. For somebody, for Kelly, for you, you go watch it and you get something specific about it. Wow, I was really interested in how he did that folding skin. And you get really excited about it and you start working on that. And I'm sitting there saying, oh, that folding skin is completely bogus. I don't like it. But you know what? He thought about how the air flows through it, and that's kind of interesting, so maybe that'll work. So we went and we saw the same thing. We heard him talk about the exact same thing, but we got different things out of it. And that's the way it should be. We should have that experience. And it's okay that our inspiration is different. That's part of being a designer. We can't all be the same, otherwise the world would look the same. It wouldn't be very fun. This should not be a chore or cause any extra effort on your part. You should always have your eyes open. You should always be looking at things. You should always be noticing little things. What font did somebody choose on a particular piece of paper? Did they lay it out correctly? Did they spend time thinking about what the handout was and what it looked like and what font was on the handout and how they organized the information? All those things matter. And are you thinking about it and are you aware from it? It comes from the desire to create or communicate. You guys wouldn't be here in this classroom if you didn't have this desire. This desire to build things, to make things more beautiful, to make things more interesting, to make better products. You wouldn't be in this room thinking about it if you didn't have some of that. So you have that desire, so how do you capitalize on it? How do you make it better? Don't forget to look inward at your own things. Each of us have our side jobs, so to speak, our other things that we're interested in. Some of you are painters, some of you are photographers, some of you like to draw, some of you like to compose music, some of you like to play music. I don't know. All of those other little things help you become a creative person. They help you harness this general inspiration and make you a better designer. So, what do? We walk around the world and we try to be, number one, we try to be aware. Number two, how do we keep track of all that stuff? Now, there are a few of us out there that have these incredible minds that can remember absolutely everything all the time. Now, you read about those people in books. Most of us aren't those kinds of people, including myself. So how do we deal with the idea of collecting this information? How do we not forget that we saw that really cool way the light passed across the brick? And I want to use that texture in a future design. How do we remember that stuff? You collect it and place them in a safe place that you check frequently. That could be as simple as taking pictures of it with your phone. Life is awesome. You guys have phones. You can snap pictures of it. Great. I have it for later. In the old days, you had to carry a sketchbook with you all the time. And then you would make little drawings. There's nothing wrong with that either. Actually, it's probably a really good thing for you guys to practice the drawing. The other thing is that you can draw on a variety of things and put them into your sketchbook. If you like something, if it turned out really cool, you saw something that somebody did and you've got a handout, I don't know, that was really neat, stick it into your sketchbook, because those kinds of things can help make you inspired later on. So write notes, make drawings, take photographs for all those things that inspire you. How do you nurture that inspiration? Well, if you carry a sketchbook or you carry a camera with you, you guys all have phones, life is awesome. Take pictures. Don't forget to get it out of your pocket and actually take the picture of it. Become immersed in design. That's the cool thing about design school. You guys are all here, you're learning about design, you're in it together, you have studio, you have a variety of classes, you have your friends, you all talk about it. That's great. Because you're there and you're talking about it, or because you're here and you're talking about it, you're immersed in this process. There's a lecture series. You go with your friends, you go to the lecture series. Then afterward, you're hungry, you go eat something. And you sit with your friends and you talk about what they lectured about. You're part of this design process. That's part of how you become more inspired. Commit to discovering and collecting new inspirational factors. Communicate with other designers. There's a reason I like to teach here, because I get to interact with all of you. If I was just doing my other job, I wouldn't interact with you guys. I wouldn't have that inspiration. I wouldn't have you guys being excited about design in the first place. It makes a difference as a designer to have that. If you're stuck and you just don't feel inspired, go take a walk. Do something physical. Get out of this room. Get some fresh air. That kind of stuff matters. Listen to music. Music can be great at helping you work through things. So I have a confession to make. Music did help me when I was in studio. Music did help me when I was in grad school. I wrote my entire 85-page master thesis listening to the soundtrack of the Pirates of the Caribbean. It worked. I don't think I've listened to it since, but for whatever reason, in that mode, I could come in, I could put my headphones on, I could put my hood up, and I could just type. And I would just listen to the Pirates of the Caribbean. It doesn't make any sense, but it worked for me. It was inspiring for me. So for each of you, think about what it is that does that. And try to use it to your advantage. And don't be embarrassed about it. I mean, it's kind of funny to talk about the Pirates of the Caribbean and how, and yeah, okay, in the moment I might have not admitted that I was listening to the Pirates of the Caribbean, but it helped me write my thesis. Is that a bad thing? No, not at all. Attend conferences, lectures, and events. We put on a lecture series every spring here. Go to the lecture series. See what other designers are doing. That by itself can help. because you're seeing what other people are doing. Explore, try something new. Inspiration is always the first step toward the final design. These are just some book covers that I find particularly entertaining. I'll show you a bunch of album covers later on. Anybody read this? It's really funny. But it's a great album, or great book cover too. So the design process. Number one, and we'll go into all of these in detail as we go forward in the slides. Number one, we're doing research. Then we're moving into information gathering. Finally, we're doing brainstorming and conceptualization. We get into experimentation, design development, and then finally the execution phase. The weird thing about the design process is you can't skip steps. And I think this is something that young designers frequently do, is they say, I have an inspiration, this is what my design's going to be, and they jump to the final. And they skip all the stuff in the middle. And when they do that, and they jump to the final, there's a lot of unexplored little side alleys and little extra bits of information that could have made their design significantly better than it ended up being. And so by not skipping steps, you give the design process and you give your design enough time to mature to be the best that it can be. If you skip ahead to the end, it won't be the best. You can't focus on that final product. You can't say, this is my end goal, and I'm just focused on that. You have to work through the process of getting to that place. Design is always an evolution. It's always iteration. Try something, change it, tweak it, make it better. Move on, get critique from somebody else, come back, change it, revise it, go back to what you did before. Change that this way. Move in a different direction, come back. That's the design process. It's always evolving. Every step needs to have your full undivided attention. You need to actually be working on it to make it better. It doesn't just magically get better by sitting around. It can be totally exhausting, but it can also be the most rewarding thing in the world. So you spend all this time, you work really hard, you evolve your design, you keep coming back, you're frustrated, you've worked, you get more critique, you come back, it's not good enough, you change it, you get to that end goal, and you show it to somebody and they say, wow, this is fantastic. Boy, do you feel good that moment. Now, the other can be true when they say, this is awful. And you need to go back and try again. That's the exhausting part. But when it does work and when it really sings, boy, is it ever great. And that's part of why we do this. So the project brief. This is the initiation of the design process in general. So this is when somebody comes to you and says, I want you to design this. I want you to do that. It initiates the design process. It should be a very meticulous overview of whatever the project or the scope of the project is. What are you responsible to try to do as a designer? It should address the design in detail and every aspect of the problem. So a good example here would be, let's say, Ryan, you come up to me and you say, I want you to design me a new kitchen. I say, sweet, I'd love to design you a new kitchen. Okay, I'm gonna go design you a kitchen. That was all the communication we had. I go back and I design incredible chef's kitchen. It's 4,000 square feet. It's got stainless everywhere. It's got 16 refrigerators. And I come back and say, Ryan, check out this awesome kitchen that I made. And you're like, dude, man, I don't have the money to buy that. Furthermore, I only have 100 square feet. Like, this is all I got. That's a problem. We didn't communicate in the beginning about what the scope of this project would be. So it's your job as the designer, not the client. So in this case, it's not your fault, it's my fault. Because I didn't ask you about what is it that you really want. We didn't address the design in detail. We didn't talk about what it is that you want out of that design process. So now in Studio, you guys are all in Studio right now. You're in 121. You're going to move on to 220. We love to make these things vague. And I'll admit this as a faculty person. We love to make the meticulous overview of the project rather vague. Because we like lots of loopholes. We like you to go off on tangents. It's part of good student learning to have to solve problems. So if it was too meticulous, you're not going to get that in school. However, in the real world, your client is going to be specific about, no, I don't want a modernist house. I hired you, but you're not doing a modernist house. I want a craftsman. because that's who they are, and they're paying you. So you're going to end up doing it that way. So it's really important that you understand what the scope of the project is, and you have a really good communication session with whoever's starting this process. It should define the roles of you, the designer, the client, the person who's paying you or asking you to do the work in the first place, and also the viewer or the person who's using it. So in the case of our lecture series poster, this would define the role of you as the designer. You're making up the lecture series poster. The client is me. I'm asking you to make up the lecture series poster. And the viewer is all the rest of the students who are going to look at that lecture series poster. So you should have a clear understanding of what that is before you start the design process. Begin with information that the client gives you. That's always a good place to start. Usually they have some information that they want to give you. You need to clarify and simplify that information. You need to make sure you understand that information. You need to read that information. Then you, the designer, needs to go back and ask questions to fill in the missing pieces of information. So you don't do something blind. You need to make sure that you go back and you understand, you figure out where the problems are, you figure out where the questions are going to arise, and you go back to that client and you ask them questions. So in a studio environment, in a school environment, you read through that program brief. This is what the design is going to be. You come up with your questions, then you go back, in this case to me, and you ask me. So we're doing that lecture series poster hypothetically again. I say you're going to do a lecture series poster. You look at the information. You say, wait a minute. You didn't tell me who the lecturers are going to be or where they're going to be. And since it's school, I say, well, guess what? You can determine who they are. But in the real world, you would need that information to do the lecture series poster because there would be a schedule. There would be who's coming. Define the primary goals and the messages to be expressed. So what's the primary goal? Get somebody to come to the lecture series. That's a really important thing for you to know before you start the design process. Define any restrictions. I can only print in black and white because I don't have the money to print in color. It's a pretty big restriction. That's not the case. You guys can print in color. It's OK. But that would be something that would be important to know. How much are they willing to pay for something? How much time do you have? If they're going to pay, if somebody hires you to do the lecture series poster and they say, I'm going to pay you $100, you might say, oh, that's pretty good. And you think about, OK, well, $100, if I was making $20 an hour, that would be 5 hours worth of work. OK, seems reasonable. If I worked 40 hours on it or 50 hours on it, and I got paid $2 an hour, would that feel reasonable anymore? No. No. Likewise, if they paid you $1,000 and you worked 1 hour on it and you earned $1,000 for that hour, you'd feel pretty good about yourself. But it might not be the best value for your client. So you really kind of want to be aware of this kind of thing. You want to define the timetable for completion. How soon do they need it? If it's a lecture series poster, it needs to be up in advance before the lecture happens. So when does it need to be done? In the case of the class, I'm going to tell you it's due this day. So there you go. There's your timetable. And then you define the audience. Who are you trying to speak to about a particular project? Then we move into this gathering phrase. This is where you're collecting all the stuff that's important. And so I'll keep on this whole poster thing. Maybe you have a list of who you think the speakers are going to be, and you want to go find images of their work. Research who the speakers are going to be. That's all good information. You're collecting that information so that you can use it and put it on the poster. You need to be aware of that. If anything's missing, if you can't find anything, you have to go figure out who's going to do it. So an example of this that I have that was from my own personal life, I was asked, this was a long time ago, probably 9 years ago, I was asked by a friend of mine, they were going to run for a school board position. And they said, we need a website. And at the time, I was reasonably savvy with websites and that sort of thing. So I'm like, yeah, I can set you up a website, no problem. And so that was fine. And it wasn't like something I did for pay or anything like that. It was a favor. And so I set up the website and I got it ready. And it was ready. And I was like, OK, well, here's the About Me page. And like, I need to know about you. That what do you want? Here's my goals for my campaign and that kind of stuff. And they were like, oh, well, can't you just write it? It's like, no, it's your campaign. You tell me what you want to put on the website. So I needed to go back to that person and say, you need to create this stuff and give it to me, and I'll put it on the website. So you have to be clear about who's responsible for doing various things. Then you get into research or information gathering. This is where you have to gain an understanding of the topic in general. So if you're asked to design a lecture series poster with these speakers, you probably should go research the speakers and understand who the speakers are in general. What are they going to be talking about? Those kinds of things are important. If you're designing a kitchen, you should have some basic understanding of what is in a kitchen. And my guess is you know what's in a kitchen. But you know what I mean? If somebody came to you and said, great, I need you to design a zoo. Well, I don't know the first thing about a zoo. I don't know how much space you need for elephants. I would need to go research that so that I could appropriately design that. And that's one of the really cool things about design. And I'm speaking more in the architectural sense here. But regardless, one of the great things about design is that people ask you to do stuff that you don't always get to do. And you get to go learn about that stuff. And you get to get excited about what is it that makes a zoo cool. And then you get to design a zoo. It's really cool. Maybe it's, I don't know, an airport. Well, then you have to go figure out what's in an airport. How does an airport work? In 220, frequently, the project is somewhere around a school. Well, you guys are all in school, so that helps you understand what goes into a school. But you kind of need to visit schools and understand what's happening. It wouldn't hurt you to go visit Berkeley and see what their studios are like, or go down to Cal Poly and see what their studios are like. It would help you learn to be a better designer. So it's this research phase that's really important. Read, evaluate, and understand all the materials that you're going to be working with. No surprise there. Independently research additional information. Don't just trust your client. They might be very slanted in one direction. You might want to have a broader understanding of what's happening. Review the client's current communication materials. So if they've already been doing certain things, maybe you need to read what are the kinds of things they've been doing. That'll help set expectations a little bit better. And investigate competitive markets. What else is going on? What other lecture series are out there? Berkeley puts on a lecture series. What does their poster look like? Not a bad type of research to have. Then you get into brainstorming. And this is, you guys have done this kind of thing like for essays and whatever. You're getting your thoughts together. And this is great in a sketchbook. You get these conceptual ideas together, you throw them together, you kind of play around with them, mix them up, shuffle them, and that gets you ready to start this next phase, which is your actual conceptualization. You're formulating the plan for the project. This is where the big thematic link between the elements are going to happen. And you kind of get ready to do that design process. And then, of course, you get into the experimentation phase, where you try out a bunch of different things. You try different colors. You try different compositional strategies. You try different typefaces. What's feeling right? What's not feeling right? Iteration. Ask your neighbor. Come back. Do some more. Change it. Ask somebody else. That whole feedback loop is really, really important. Vary the sequence. Try something new. Introduce graphic shapes as necessary. We'll go into this in a lot more detail in the coming lectures in terms of what specifically you would do as part of the design process. And then finally, it gets down to the execution. You filter out and you pick the best ideas from all that jumble of work. You examine every detail. And then this is the biggest one that is the absolute hardest one to learn to do. It's right there. Once you finish a project, or at least what you think is a project, or you get to a milestone place in a project, you have to be able to show it to somebody and have them give you honest feedback and not shut down. And it's really hard, especially when you're a young starting out designer. You've spent hours and hours and hours working on something. You come to a design professional, you come to your critique at the end of a big design project, and you give your presentation, and you're all excited about it, and the reviewer says, yeah, you missed it. You really got to go back and think about this, and what if you took this apart? Anybody ever had a model torn apart before? Yep, it happens. Okay? What happens when that model tears, when that person does it? Does your heart just like ache because you spent all this time working on it? Okay? It's natural. It's totally okay that your heart is like, ugh. Okay? But what happens in that moment, when your heart goes, you have a choice. You can say, ah, no, and stop and not listen to a thing that anybody says. Or you can divorce yourself from that attachment of, this is my precious object, please don't hurt it. And you could say, you know what? This person took time out of their day. They're not getting paid to be here. And they're trying to make me better. They're trying to help me be a better person and be a better designer. What is it that they have to say? Let me listen. Let me find out what they think. Let me evaluate that. That's really hard, but it's the most important thing you can do as a designer. You have to be able to divorce yourself from being attached to that precious object that you spent hours working on. And it sounds, I can be up here and I can talk about it all day long. It sounds really easy. It's not. It's not at all. Because you're invested in it. And it's natural to be invested in it. However, you need to cultivate the skill to be able to listen to the people that are critiquing you and not panic at that moment. And actually listen to what they have to say. Because they have more experience and they're really honestly there to try to help you. They're not there to be mean. When they tear apart your model, they're not there because, oh good, I'm going to come in today and tear apart some models. They didn't come in like that. They came in and said, I'm going to make you a better designer, and I'm going to show you how to do it. And that's really important. You want to analyze objectively. You want to review that project brief. Go back. Did you actually solve what you said you were going to solve? That's a good thing to check. And then you ultimately produce that final draft of the project. Intuition. Trust your inner voice. This is the second half of what I'm talking about today. We talked about inspiration. Now we're going to talk about intuition. So this is the complement. This is the other side. This is learning to trust your intuition. You can learn design fundamentals. We can talk all day long about compositional strategies. We can talk about typography and what font you should choose. If design was just a formula-driven, specific thing, computers could do design. And there's no need to have a designer. Because it's not. You have to understand the fundamentals, and then you have to trust your intuition that you're doing it right, or what's going to turn out better. Good comprehension of techniques does not equal good design. So just because you understand, it's the example that I showed in the rule of thirds, where I showed my father-in-law that was sitting on the beach, and he was in the 1/3, and he was looking out, and the 2/3 were on the outside where he was looking. And then I flipped it, and I had him on the wrong direction, looking the wrong way. It still satisfies the rule. It still fits the rule of thirds, but it's not correct. So just understanding the technique doesn't mean that it is applied correctly. So intuition is fundamentally a different level of thinking. It's the complement to rational thought. It's that gut feeling about something. And it takes a long time to learn to trust that gut feeling. It comes naturally, it can't be forced, and it allows for thoughts that would not come from a rational thought process. So it's not the I'm just going to work through the problem, now it's solved. It's that other side of things. It's guiding you, it's pushing you in those directions that are uncomfortable. Guidance, protection. Protection is the, yeah, that doesn't look very good, part of it. Inspiration, well, what if I tried this? It's a little out there. The best projects that you will ever do are the ones that you take a risk. It's the one that you say, you know what? I could fail the class by doing this, but this is, if I do it right, this is going to be awesome. It's that kind of a risk that can make a big difference. That's that intuitive drive behind you. It cultivates your imagination, which is important. It allows you to move beyond your comfort zone. So if I always did the same design, if I always worked within the same framework and I never pushed the boundaries of that design, life would end up getting really boring. So this intuition lets you step out. It often leads to fresh and innovative solution. It increases the number of ideas you might have, and it might provide that spark that pushes you forward. The challenges are that you have to trust in it without thinking about what's that going to do for the final product. You have to kind of roll with it a little bit and decide later whether it's really working or not. It takes time to believe that your instincts are valuable. Early on in your design career, it's hard to trust the intuition. Later on, you've designed a bunch of stuff. You know that you can have a gut feeling about something. And so here's an example. You're in a review, and this may have happened to some of you already. It will certainly happen in the next 2 years to you. And you're sitting down and you give a presentation, and the person who's reviewing you is sitting there, and they're saying, you know, something's not quite right about that. But I'm struggling to try to figure out what that is. You know, it's just off. That right there is the designer, the professional's intuition saying, no, it's not quite right. And I don't exactly know why yet. I'm going to try to figure it out, but something's doesn't feel right. The gut reaction isn't right there. And it takes a while for you to learn to have that on your own and to be able to look at your own work and decide, yeah, you're right, that doesn't look right. Something's off. And you'll learn and you'll cultivate this. Don't prejudge or abandon without letting that idea mature. So this is the other thing about it. Don't just automatically say, oh, that's a terrible idea. You have this idea that pops into your head. Oh, that'd be kind of cool. No, that's awful. Don't do that. Let that idea come out. If you're a designer, those ideas have to come out a little bit. You have to try it out and see. It's not always useful or appropriate. That's the other part about it. Sometimes your intuition says, maybe you should do this, you should do this, you should do it. You say, no, that's not going to turn out right. And you have to move on. That's OK. That's part of it too. How do you nurture that intuition? Don't be afraid to take risks. So you obviously have to be aware of what class you're in at a given time and how the professors react to certain things that you do. I can tell you right now in this class, it is set up for you to take risks. It's set up for you to try stuff out. And if it doesn't work, you can always go back and do something safer. I will never penalize you for trying something. So I build in all of those regrades. You can do an assignment. If it doesn't turn out well, you can do a regrade. You remember that? There's no reason not to take a risk. There's no reason not to push yourself further. There's no reason not to try something. Because I want you to be a better designer. So we've got safety checks in place so you're not going to fail because all of you care about your grade. The truth is that your grade right now, it matters so that you can transfer. That's it. Nobody in your work is going to ask for your transcripts and say, oh, you got a B in digital tools. I'm not hiring you. I mean, it doesn't work that way in life. It doesn't. They look at your portfolio. Is your portfolio good? Yeah, OK, I'll hire you. They don't care what grade you got in a particular class. However, when you're a stage, it does matter because it's part of the transfer. And then you transfer and you work there and your grades kind of matter because then it matters for grad school. And then in grad school, you know what? Grades don't matter. It's pretty cool. You know? So in grad school, so like right now, you guys are in school and you get feedback all the time. Right? You do your assignment and you'll get a grade sheet next class when you come in, and you get a grade for that grade sheet. And then you go a little longer and you get another grade. Okay? Then you move on to your undergrad, like at Berkeley, and you're doing your studios there, and you might get feedback once or twice in the semester. Yeah, you're about a B. That's about all the feedback you get. Yeah, okay, and then you get your grade at the end. In grad school, you look at your transcript after the semester like, oh, I guess that's what I got. There's no feedback at all in the process. It's totally different. Anyway, that was kind of a side note. Sorry, I'm off on tangents today. Listen to that inner voice and react. Expect the unexpected from yourself. That's really important. This is it's the branching out part. Don't overanalyze. As soon as you start to overanalyze something, you're in the rational side, not the intuition side. So you want to be on the intuition side. Record your thoughts and collect your visuals. Elevate your design. So in the design process, there are things that you think about rationally, those that you learn about, and those that you're looking for. That's all the stuff we're trying to teach you. Okay, that's the skill sets that we're working through. And then there's this most interesting part that you cannot be rational about. This is that other side. You just feel it for some strange reason. This is part of the design process. You feel it for some strange reason. If you feel right, it will fit into your concept perfectly, and it will make it more interesting and more unique. So you've got all these skills, and then you need to have that other side to balance it out to make that really great design. OK, so today in exercise 109, we're going to start out working in InDesign. I'm going to give you an overview of InDesign, and then I'll show you how to place images, and we'll build our first thing. The first thing that I'm going to ask you to do today is to create an album cover. I've always found this one really fun because everybody can pick whoever their favorite band is or whoever their favorite artist is. It's kind of fun to see who people pick. So I'm going to show you a bunch of album covers. They're not necessarily the best album covers or the worst album covers. I tried to get a broad collection so that hopefully you'll at least recognize one in here. You're going to be creating one of these album covers for your band, whoever you really like, and you'll create it. And so these are a combination generally of some kind of photograph and some kind of graphics. Usually they have some text as part of those graphics. Pay attention to the font that's been chosen. We'll spend a whole lecture talking about fonts. But you can see that they're different and unique. These, if we start thinking about these as album covers, there's a purpose for an album cover. If you're browsing, people don't really do this anymore, but in the old days, right, you would go to a record store and you'd flip through the records to try to pick an album. And then CDs came out, and so you'd go to a CD store and you'd flip through and try to see. So it was always based on what you saw on the cover as to, do I want to try to listen to this or not? Now it's more, in the iTunes library or something, where you're kind of flipping through and trying to decide, yeah, I like this or not, or it just comes up on your Pandora feed or your Spotify or your Amazon Music or whatever it is that you use to stream music. And so it's a little bit different. And the purpose of an album cover has changed a little bit. But it's still fundamentally, I want you to listen to my music. So I need this album cover to entice you into listening to my music. And obviously to share basic information about who the artist is and what the name of the album would be, etc. And so you can see just by flipping through how different all of these album covers are. I love this album cover. This is one of the best. Not that the band was the best ever. Sometimes artists do an album cover and then they make a duplicate album that's slightly different. So in this case, Chris Lane did his regular album and then he did an all-acoustic album. So the album covers look similar, but they're slightly different. Pre-Photoshop. So I'm hoping, as I go through this, that at least you will have recognized a few of these artists along the way. Sometimes they're really simple, and sometimes they're more complicated. Yeah, you guys right now could all make this album cover. Not much to it. So this is my other confession. This is one of my favorite albums of all time. I do not play it in front of my kids. It's the one that I play when I'm trying to do really productive work, and I don't want anybody to bother me. This was a special album. Anybody recognize it? No? None of you have ever heard it, probably. Okay? So this is probably in about the year 2000 or so. Metallica got the idea that they were going to play with the San Francisco Symphony, and they were going to somehow mesh the two. And it is incredible. Now, I happen to like Metallica anyway as a side artist, so it was kind of fun to see it come together. However, you should actually go on YouTube and do it. Pull it up, because it's pretty cool. Because you've got the entire San Francisco Symphony behind them playing, and they all have their violins, and they're just going to town. It's really cool. Anyway, it's a fun album. But here's an example. No words, nothing. We've got one picture, and the album was called the S&M album. You've got the symphony and the little Metallica M, S&M. That's it. It's a really well done cover for what that album was. That's a pretty iconic album. I had to throw this one out there too. Gotta love the 90s, right? Tried to throw a few more current things for you. And that's kind of the fun thing about album covers, is they're a renewable resource. Right? Every year there's new albums that come out, there's new ones to look at. So today we're going to switch over, and we're going to create our own album cover for an artist of our choice. It is an artist of your choice, so I don't mind what you're picking from. Let's take a quick break for about 5 minutes or so that I can switch the stuff over, and then I'll go through InDesign and set you guys loose for today. Okay? Okay, so we're going to get started with exercise 109 and the demo portion with Adobe InDesign. So we've been opening up Photoshop. Next to it is the pink icon for Adobe InDesign. It's also an Adobe product, so it should look reasonably similar when you go to open it, though it is slightly different. Each of the Adobe products has a specific purpose. And so Photoshop fundamentally has the purpose of editing and fixing photos. InDesign is fundamentally charged with doing layouts. And these layouts could be big presentation boards, or they could be books, or anything in between for that matter. But we can have multi-page documents. You'll do your portfolio in InDesign. But it's not creating content. It's about creating layouts. You should create your content in other applications like Photoshop, like Illustrator, like AutoCAD, etc., or SketchUp, or Rhino, or V-Ray, or whatever. But InDesign is about laying the stuff out, dealing with type and fonts and labels and all of that sort of thing. So when I first opened InDesign, this is what shows up. I did it like this so that we would see it at the same time. We want to create a new document. So right here in the middle, it says create something new, and there's a button for create new. I'm going to click on that create new button. And we don't have any recents. We're going to go over here to print. And in the print section, down at the bottom, they still have, believe it or not, compact disc. That's going to be our album cover size. So I'm going to go ahead and click on compact disc as the preset. Now if we come over here under preset details, you can see that the width and the height are in this really weird format. So 28p 4.157. These are in a unit called a pica. It is a default layout unit that a lot of large scale layout people use. So like if you were a magazine designer and you did the graphic layouts for, say, Time magazine or InStyle or whatever magazine you guys read, those would be done in InDesign using the unit of pica. Picas mean absolutely nothing to me. I have no idea how big a pica is. It is what it is. So I can change the units over into inches, and I can see that, oh, it's 4.7244 inches. OK, I can work with that. At least I know approximately how big that would be. It doesn't really matter whether you change it or not. I'm going to show you how to change it in the document so that you can change it after the fact if you wanted to as well. This is a square document, so the orientation doesn't matter. But if we wanted to switch the orientation, for example, if we had a letter-size page and we wanted to switch from portrait mode to landscape mode, we can do that using these two buttons. I'm going to go back to compact disc. I'll go back to inches. It allows us to choose a number of pages and a page start number if we want to. It also has a checkbox for something called facing pages. We'll talk about what facing pages are when we get to multi-page documents. I'll go through it, and it'll make a lot more sense. For now, uncheck it, because we only need the single album cover. We don't need to worry about columns or anything setting up. Margins we have, and we can set them up. These are arbitrary values. They're set at 1/2 inch. For our purposes in this, we're going to set them all to 0, because we don't need margins around our CD cover. They are all locked and chained together, so when I change one, all will change to 0. So I would recommend changing those to 0 now. You can do it after the fact if you forget as you go forward. Bleed and slug we'll talk about later. I'm going to leave it closed and not worry about it, but I will explain what those are later on. At this point, I'm ready, and I'll go ahead and create the document. So I'll click on Create, and it builds the document for me. So in the world of InDesign, the white page is what our document is. That's the physical piece of paper that our document is. The gray space around the document is stuff that is not part of our document. We could still have an object that goes off the page, but it wouldn't get printed and wouldn't be included in our final. There is a blue bar that shows up for you guys that it will ask every time, because these computers aren't, they're frozen, so it's going to do this every time. It says, do you want to use keyboard shortcuts that are closer to Illustrator or to Photoshop? Because Adobe uses them. I would choose Illustrator personally, but if you want to choose Photoshop, that's fine. I try, when I'm doing lecture format, I try not to use keyboard shortcuts to the most part, so that you guys know what I'm clicking on instead. So anyway, I'm just clicking on Use Illustrator to make that blue bar go away. But again, it doesn't matter too much. So let's talk about what's happening in the InDesign window. It looks a lot like Photoshop, but a little different. So at the top, we have our traditional file menu structure. Differences in the menu, we've got a layout menu, a type menu, and an object menu. Those three help us transform certain elements that are about layouts, no surprise. We have our standard tools running down the left-hand side here, including our text tool and our frame tool. We'll use both of those today. The frame tool is a rectangle with an X in it, and I'll explain that one a little bit later as we go forward. There is also a free transform tool. It's like a rectangle with a bunch of dots around it and a mouse arrow kind of over it. And again, we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later on. As I come down a little bit further, there's one other major difference in the color. In Photoshop, there's two solid blocks of color. One's called a foreground color, one's called a background color in Photoshop. In InDesign and in Illustrator, which will look very similar to InDesign, we have a fill color and a stroke color, also known as an outline color. So in this particular case, I have nothing to fill an object, and I have a black border running around the object because of my black border is my stroke or outline color, and my fill color is set to none, so it would be transparent. So we'll explain those a little bit more as we start to create objects. Depending on what tool, just like Photoshop, as I pick a different tool, the ribbon at the top of the page is going to change based on the tool that I pick. So it's going to vary. If I pick the frame tool, I'm going to get options related to the frame tool. If I pick the text tool, I'm going to get options related to the text tool. So that ribbon's going to change, so you want to pay attention to that ribbon. On the right side here, we have a few little windows that will pop up. We have a window for pages, we have a window for layers, and we have a layer for links. We also have a stroke and a color and a swatches window. Let me explain first the links layer, or the links window. So the world of InDesign is set up so that you have source documents, you have the original artwork for things, and you do the layout in InDesign. InDesign is also able to handle 200, 300, 400, 500 page documents, really big files, giant poster boards without much trouble. But if we loaded in all the content, if let's say we did a National Geographic magazine, and let's say for argument's sake that National Geographic is 100 pages long or 150 pages long, it's usually full of pictures with a little text. That's an awful lot of pictures to go in a single document. If I embedded all of those in there, I'd end up with an InDesign file that was really big and heavy. So InDesign instead uses a link reference system. So I tell it I want this photo to go here, and it says, great, I know where that photo exists on my hard drive, and when it comes time to do that export to PDF or export to JPEG or whatever the final print version is, I'll go get the original and substitute it into my drawing. So all we see in the space that we're working with is a preview. It's a small scaled down version of the original. InDesign has to go get the original when we do the export. So it makes a big difference to keep track of your files and to be organized about where you're putting your files such that when you create the InDesign document, you don't lose the photo. So for example, let's say today I'm working on this album cover and I go find a background image and I put it on the desktop. Great, looks great. I go home, I come back tomorrow, and I have saved my InDesign file on my flash drive. Great, I come in here, I start up my computer, and I open the InDesign file, and InDesign's going to throw me an error saying, I can't find the photo that was on your desktop because it's not there anymore. So you may have to make sure you keep all the content in your flash drive. So don't put it on the desktop, don't put it in the documents folder, make sure it goes on your flash drive. The links window here will show us links to all of that, and I'll bring that back open so that you can see it a little bit later on. We're not going to deal with pages today, but we could create multiple page documents here. Just like in Photoshop, we have the ability to work with layers, to have certain things on different layers. Again, today we're not going to deal with that too much. Stroke, this has to do with our line, our outline, and what it looks like. Color, specific color values if we wanted to create a specific color. And swatches are just preset color values that I can pick from as I create some document. The Creative Cloud libraries aren't loading, so we can just safely ignore that part of it. Doesn't really matter for our purposes today. So if I didn't convert to inches when I created the document, I have two rulers that go along the page here. If I right-click where the two rulers meet, I can change from my pica unit into my inches unit or to any other inches or into any other unit if I wanted to as well. So the active area of my page is this white space. So when I start to think about an album cover, I need to place some imagery into this album. So in the interest of finding and starting an album, I'm going to go do some searches for some basic images. I'm going to do my daughter's favorite artist. She's 7, and her favorite artist is Luke Bryan. So I'll do a Luke Bryan album for her. And so when I'm doing that, it's going to be some kind of a country type album. So I'm looking for some kind of grassy field background or something like that as part of it. So I might do farm or field. And I'll do a Google image search. And I started in the Creative Commons just so that I'd find an image that I was free to use. And let's see, of course, it's going to be really slow today. Perfect. And so I'm going to look, remember, under size. I want to make sure that my tools are showing. I'll look under size, larger than probably 2 megapixels is a good place to start. There we go. And I will find an image that I like. So maybe it's this image. Let me visit this site. Hopefully they won't make me sign up for it. Boy, the internet's slow today. There we go. Free download, original size. Please log in. Oh, man. How about if I download this? Nope. Apparently I have to log in for that one. So not into that. Go back. There we go. Good old Wikipedia. We'll use an image from there. If the image shows up. Nope, that wasn't it. There was that one. There we go. And so we'll go ahead and download that. Maybe. Boy, I'm just having terrible luck today. Is the internet slow for you guys? Or is it just my computer? It's terrible. I like that image. Oh, awful. See if this one will load. Save image as. Maybe this will let me do it. All right. Sorry. OK, let me put it into today's folder. And we're in 109. And we'll do save. Perfect. And so now that I have that image, I need to think about how am I going to bring it into this particular document. And so to do that, I could just bring it in and then resize it. Or I can create what's called a frame first. And the frame controls where the object is going to go. And so if I come down here on the left side, there's a rectangle with an X in it. It's called the rectangular frame tool. I should point out, by the way, if I click and hold, I can do an ellipse frame and a polygon frame if I wanted to. We're going to stick with the rectangular frame. And essentially, I can draw on my document a frame. And so it gives me this blue border and then an X that represents the frame. And with that object selected, so I've come back up to the black arrow here, which is called the selection tool. I've selected that object. I can go to the File menu, and I can go to Place. So it's File and then Place. And then I can go find that file that I just saved. Remember, I saved it on my flash drive so that I would have access to it later on if I went to open it. There it is. I'll go ahead and say Open. And there it is. It dropped the image into the frame. Now, we have a little bit of a problem here because there's white space on top of the frame and white space on the bottom of the frame. If I wanted to completely fill this frame, I could right-click, and I could go to something called Fitting right here. And I have several different options when it comes to fitting. I can fill the frame proportionally. I can fit the content proportionally. I can fit the frame to the content. I can fit the content to the frame. I can center the content. And so let me show you what these different options do. So if I fill frame proportionally, it will expand and fill the entire frame without distorting the image. In contrary to that, if I went to Fitting and I said Fit Content to Frame, it's going to stretch the image to fit versus enlarging the image. Under Fitting, if I choose Fit Content Proportionally, it's going to make sure the whole image fits inside the frame, even if there's blank space in the frame. If I right-click and I go to Fitting, and I say Fit Frame to Content, it's going to adjust the size of the frame to match the content. So the frame got smaller to match. If I right-click and go to Fitting, we already did Fit Content to Frame. Center Content is pretty obvious what it does. So I now have this object, and if I wanted to make it bigger, the natural tendency is to go to my arrow tool and to just make one of these sizes bigger. The problem there is I'm only adjusting the frame. And you'll see that this is actually how you can crop an image, by just adjusting the frame. The image stays the same. If I want to change the image, I'm going to come down a little bit further to the Free Transform tool, which is a rectangle with a bunch of little dots on it and an arrow. When I'm in the Free Transform tool, I can adjust the image and the frame and make that bigger. I'll go back to here. If I want to stay in proportion, I would have to hold down Shift, and I can make this bigger. So if, for example, I didn't want these bars at the top and the bottom of the page, I could make my frame, the whole size of the page. And I could right-click on the frame and go to Fitting and say, let's center the content first. Right-click, Fitting, and I want to fill frame proportionally. That means it's not going to stretch the image at all, but it's going to completely fill the frame. If I double-click on the image, we should be able to see. There it is. You used to be able to, in CS6, you could double-click the image. Now you have to switch to the white arrow, the Direct Select tool, in which case you can see the overall image. It's highlighted in that kind of orange color. And I can move that image if I wanted a different layout. There's some natural snaps that are built in, so you can get to the center if you want to. Now, you guys are probably saying, well, wait a minute, that image is really blurry. Okay, you're absolutely right. It is blurry, because InDesign is giving us a preview of what the actual image looks like, not the original image. If it looks too blurry and you want to see it a little bit sharper, you can right-click on the image, go to Display Performance, and instead of Typical Display, you can go to High Quality Display. That'll sharpen up the image and let you see it in its full resolution. The reason that it stays, by default, in the typical quality here, that's kind of blurry and chunky, is because you have an idea of what's in the image already. You did your post-processing, you took the image, you know what it looks like. You don't need to see a full resolution version of it. You just need an approximation of it. Keeps InDesign working really fast, and so as a result, you see the lower quality version. When, however, we do the export, it will always go get the high quality version to see. So I've now put the background image in. I need to add some text. So I said this was going to be a Luke Bryan album, so I'll use the text tool. I'm going to come down here and click on the T for text, and I'll click and drag and make a box. There it is. And because the text tool is active, I can start typing. So I could say this is Luke Bryan. And I can take this and I can change the font. So up here in my ribbon, my text ribbon, I could change the font. There's the list of all the different fonts that are available to me. I'm not going to be specific today about font choice. We'll cover that in a separate lecture. You can pick any font that seems reasonable to you. Once you've decided what the font is going to be, you can adjust the size next to it. So I could say, you know what, I want it to be 48 point. Sometimes you have to adjust the text frame to be a little bit bigger. Like that. Maybe you have to do Luke and Bryan as two separate so you have more control. We will get into what the other options are, but for our purposes today, I think I'm just going to make a separate text box for his last name. So I'll shrink that one up a little bit. Another one here. There it is. Shrink that up a little bit, and we'll lay those guys out so that they're together. Maybe like that. And I'll put them there. Now, for some of you, you may find that you want the font to be white instead of black. You can change the color of a font by double-clicking on it, selecting it, and coming down to the fill color, which changed from being just a black box to being a black T, representing the fill color of the object. If I were to double-click on the T, it brings up my color picker. From here, I could set my K value to be 0. That would be white. And I can say OK. And now that is going to show up as white. Do the same thing here. And I could set that as white in that upper corner. Or I could just type in 0 there. And it's going to give me white like that. So I've now set that up. Now, potentially, there might be some more text about the album name or whatever. You can come up with that. But you also may find that you want to put additional information or stickers or something on the album, in which case, let's say we wanted a parental advisory on it. So I could go back to my image search, back up here, and I could say parental. I actually think I already have one, since this is taking forever. All right, we'll let that work. And I would do that by creating another frame. So let me create the rectangular frame. And I draw the rectangular frame. Let's say it goes over here, like that. And I need to place that parental advisory into that frame. So with it selected, I'll go up to the File menu, and I'll go to Place, and I'm going to choose the parental advisory, and go, like I said, I already had it, and I'll go ahead and say Open. And now I'm not seeing it here. I'm seeing that there's a document. So remember, I have to go back to the Fitting options. So I'll right-click and go to Fitting, and I'm going to Fill Frame Proportionally. There we go. Looks like it's a little bit clipped. So I could right-click and go to Fitting, and I could say Fit Frame to Content. There it is. And now I can see the whole parental advisory. So as you create these drawings, you see that we have little boxes that go around and little icons and whatever. If you ever want to see your overall work without all the boxes, you can go to the View menu and you can choose under Screen Mode, you can go to Preview. and it'll take away all those boxes so you can see what it looks like without the boxes. So that's under View, Screen Mode. I'm going to go back to normal, like that. When you're done with your album cover, you can go to your File menu. And for today's purposes, we're going to do two things. The first thing we'll do is we will save the InDesign file. So you go to File and then Save. This is an INDD file, so it's an InDesign Creative Cloud 2018 document. I'm going to save it onto my flash drive. And so this is X109, fall of 2018. If I can type, there it is. And I'll go ahead and save. This allows us to go back and work with the layout again. So remember, the images are still separate. Then, to get a final version with all the images placed, I would go to File and then Export. And typically, from InDesign, we're going to be doing a lot of PDFs, or you would be doing a lot of PDFs because printing from PDFs is the easiest way to print a document. But for posting purposes, we're not going to do a PDF. We're going to do a JPEG. So I'll come down here to JPEG. You could do a PNG if you want. And with JPEG selected, the name's already set there. I'll go ahead and click on Save. It's going to bring my Export JPEG options. Now, a couple things we want to pay attention to. We could choose, if we had multiple pages, to export multiple JPEGs. It doesn't matter because we only have one album cover. Under Quality, I'm going to switch to Maximum or High. And under Resolution, I'm going to go to 300. The rest of these are all fine, and I'll go ahead and click on the Export button. And it's going to write my file. Now, if I went to my flash drive, there's my Luke Bryan cover. And double click it and open it up. Of course, it's small. There we go. And there's my final version where everything's in. And you can see that it has the full resolution image and creates a nice quality output. So the preview is just what you're seeing to keep InDesign running fast. There is a mode in InDesign where you can replace, if for some reason it was getting really slow, you can take your images and you could go to Display Performance and you could say Fast Display, and it will just make them gray with X's. So if you really needed to strip out the images for a while, you can do that. And again, that's all just settings. So I'll right-click and go back to my Display Performance and go back to Typical Display. There it is. So your job today is to create this album cover. It probably needs a name. It needs the artist. It needs the album cover. Any extras, any logos. Remember, you can go into Photoshop. Let's say your band or your artist has a particular logo. I did this with Garth Brooks last year. I picked him as an example. He has a logo, so I needed his logo to be transparent. So I took the original one that I found online, went into Photoshop, created a PNG, got rid of the background so that I could bring that in. That will work in a frame as well. So if I had a frame here, and I went to File and then Place, I could go get the transparent background. Which one was it? I think it was this one. Like that. I could right-click on it, go to Fitting, Fill Frame Proportionally. There it is. And now that has a transparent background. So if you go into Photoshop and you isolate a background, you can very easily bring it in and have it do this kind of thing where the background is transparent. So remember your Photoshop skills because you can use them when it comes to the InDesign part. Does that make sense? Yeah? So today it's about getting comfortable with InDesign, feeling like you can create a good product out of InDesign, and then we'll come back next class and we'll get into a little bit more detail about graphic design. All right? Any questions? No? All right, I'll turn you loose.